Welcome to this month's Schuman Talk, where we discuss issues we face in Europe today in the light of Robert Schuman's vision for a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. For it was on May the 9th, 1950 at 6 p.m. when the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute speech where he laid the foundation for the European house where today 450 million Europeans live together in peace. I call this the defining moment of post-war Europe because it launched the European movement for peace and unity that has led to today's European Union. And this peace is now under threat as we forget the lessons of the past. In both America and in Europe, we seem to be repeating some of the deadly mistakes of the past as we elect those who undermine the values and principles that have sustained peace and unity. And our guest today, for this month, is Ineta Lansdowne, a guide at the Museum of Occupation in Riga, Latvia. And her job is helping to jog people's memories in the light of the occupation of her country by both the Nazis and the Soviets. So, welcome, Ineta. We're very glad to have you back on the Schuman Talk because you've participated in the past on other topics. And this is a fascinating job you have, and I'm very glad to be able to explore it with you today.
Yes. Good evening, Jeff. And yeah, it's good to be joining you for this conversation.
So you're sitting obviously in front of an exhibition there. Tell us a bit about the museum, what it's for, and what your job is. Um, and yeah, we're going to explore some of the relevance of this museum now, especially since the Russian invasion of Latvia.
You meant Ukraine.
Oh, Russian
You
invasion of
you
Ukraine. Yeah.
misspoke. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, but of course, it's easy to misspeak with this background. So, a Museum of Occupation of Latvia is in Riga, as you mentioned, and it was founded in 1993. So here you can see in the slide the building, actually after renovation. And here I want to bring to your attention the first. The part that's to the left, yeah, the black box, let's call it, the dark side. It's a very interesting memory space because that was built in 1970, and it was a big propaganda year in Soviet Union. It was Vladimir Ilyich Lenin's 100th birthday anniversary. So lots of propaganda events and also building museums, which it was not really a museum with artifacts, but it was propaganda instrument to talk about Bolshevik revolution. So many older Latvians remember coming here for this indoctrination and education. And when Latvia restored independence in 1991, the building itself was sitting empty, and our museum was founded 2 years later. It is a public charity foundation, and it is state accredited, so it's also state subsidized. But you saw addition to the building, which was actually American Latvian architect's design, and the metaphor, yeah, here
That's the
by
section
the
on the right
building.
there.
Yes,
I haven't seen that. I've it's been some years since I was there.
yes.
So
So, and
what's
the
behind that?
metaphor is very obvious. It's from darkness through the light, and actually the side wall, which we can't see in this view, but it's a glass. Yeah, so it's to transparency because, as you know, so much of history is kept in sealed archives. Unfortunately, many of them are still sealed in today's Russia, so we can't fully study and research this history. But that's the metaphor, yeah, through the labyrinth of darkness. And so the exhibition is also built like labyrinth. And I saw you have a next slide with the room where I'm sitting in, which is a nation building after World War I, when map of Europe changed, and in our region, empires collapsed. It was Russian and German, and we start our timeline in the museum with November 18, 1918. That's the birth date of our republic. And
Was
here,
that the first time you got independent?
yes, as an independent state. And you can see all the photos, which is families. It's very multicultural society. And there's different minority groups as well, Polish, Russian, Jewish, German, Latvians being the absolute majority at that time, close to 80%. Also, maybe you can't see, but there is a orange box in the middle there, and we have something for younger visitors. We have many families coming with children, and there is a teddy bear, and they can go through this history through the eyes of this teddy bear, whose name is Mix. And also, maybe you notice in the design there are a lot of mirrors. And I think mirror is a very obvious symbol to me, because what do we see in the mirror?
Yes, we see ourselves. Yes,
We see ourselves.
and
Yeah. So
and on the wall there, it's too small to see, but it says there, the sovereign power of the state of Latvia is vested in the people of Latvia, and this is what you're trying to present by the mirrors, I take it.
yes, those are actually few articles from our constitution. So we have also, of course, starting the story of this nation is constitution, because we are parliamentary republic. Yeah, that was the decision of the founders. And we have also national symbols. In one of the photos is our freedom monument, which talks about the homeland, but above homeland is liberty.
And how long did that liberty last?
It lasted 20 years, even though the peace treaty with Soviet Russia in August of 1920 said that Russia forever renounces their rights to this nation and territory. Yeah, well, obviously their definition of forever was different.
Yes. Okay, let's go on through to another section then. What is this like?
Yeah, of course, I think it's very obvious with the very bright red light and with communist star. So what follows this period of independence is actually very tragic moment when us being between two superpowers, many countries in this part of Europe, between Nazi Germany and the communist Soviet Union. And here, absolutely, I recommend reading American historian Timothy Snyder, who's written a lot on this topic. His most famous book is Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin. And tragically, they become allies, and they signed their Treaty of Non-Aggression August 23, 1939, signed by their foreign ministers Molotov and Ribbentrop, where they divide Europe, specifically 6 countries, in their zones of interest or spheres of influence. And 4 smaller Baltic countries, Finland, yeah, let's not forget about Finland. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania fall to the Soviet interest. Poland is basically partitioned, yeah, German interest and Soviet interest, and also Soviets want Bessarabia, which is part of Romania, today country of Moldova. Also Bukovina was added to Ukraine, Soviet Ukraine later, so borders of Romania changed as well. But from this treaty, 1 week later, World War II starts as we know it, or as you learn in your history books, when Poland is invaded by Nazi Germany on September 1, and 2 weeks later by Soviet Union. And then to fast forward, our smaller countries will be forced to come under protection of Soviet Union, except Finland will say no. And we know that that leads to winter war, because if you refuse, then you are invaded, and they fight bravely. They had to compromise, and they lose 10% of their territory, Karelia and a few other parts, which are still today part of Russia, but they hold on to their independence. So here, going back to this red light, is then the first Soviet occupation, which follows is from
I think we have a cartoon of Hitler with Stalin too there. Is that correct?
There you will see a poster that is particularly used later during Cold War by Latvian diaspora, because of course many people in Western nations knew nothing about. Well, this was supposed to be secret protocol. It was kept secret between these superpowers, how they divided our countries.
This is the Molotov.
Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, but our historians prefer to call it also Hitler-Stalin Pact, because they are the ones who initiate.
Yes, yes. Okay.
So what follows then first is Soviet occupation, June 17, 1940, for 1 year until June 1941, when Hitler and Stalin friendship will be over. Operation Barbarossa means that Germany invades territory of Soviet Union, and then we, in Latvian territory, we have Nazi Germany's occupation for 3 years in eastern part and a little bit longer in western part, almost 4 years, until end of the World War II, when unfortunately freedom does not return, liberation does not return, but it's again Soviet occupation repeated. And that lasted almost 50 years until our country's restored independence in 1991.
And so, actually, I think there is a map showing the exile of many Latvians. Is that what
Yes.
that map is showing?
Right now, let's stay on this slide. You see a map of Soviet Union. Oh, actually, yeah, this map, this dark room. So this is, of course, geography. You know, history is about maps and where people are deported, because there will be many repressions that will take place during Soviet regime, but one of them are mass deportations. In Latvia, also Estonia, Lithuania, other occupied territories, thousands of people in 1941 and also in 1949. And on that map, which only smaller part is Europe. As you know, most of Soviet Union was in Asia, and there you can go to Pacific Ocean, crossing all these time zones. For example, where my grandmother's parents were deported to Irkutsk, that's by Lake Baikal, and 6,000 kilometers from Latvia.
So Latvia is the top left there, where that red line meets the Baltic Sea.
Yes, we had to turn the map in our exhibition because it's
Yes.
such a large territory. So Scandinavia is there in the north.
Yeah, you see Norway and Sweden going horizontal there. We usually see it vertical.
Yeah.
And that's where Latvia is.
Yeah, and then this photo to the right, it's kind of dark, but it's a model or replica of a train car. Those were cattle cars, cargo cars with people inside. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Very graphic.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then that phase lasts until.
So, as I said, the first
89.
Soviet occupation was 1 year, and these deportations started already. And this was, of course, a big shock for people, and that explains why there were some minority, but there were also a few thousand in Riga who initially welcomed German army when they entered. But they took Latvian flags to Freedom Monument because they expected liberation. That was the propaganda. But Nazis, of course, had other plans. And the greatest tragedy is what we call Holocaust or Shoah, because Nazi propaganda blamed mainly two groups for everything, all the previous crimes, Jews and communists. But usually they put them together in their propaganda as Jewish communists. Yeah, and here you see one of the annotations. We have, of course, lots of maps and documents. Almost all of Latvian Jews were killed, and it was Holocaust by bullets. People were simply shot. In small town, they take you to local forest. In the bigger cities, first they put them in ghettos. They used people basically as slaves for work. And then to make room for other European Jews from Czechoslovakia, Austria, Germany, the order was to kill Latvian Jews first. And in Riga, there are two places. In Rumbula, 25,000 killed, and in Biterniki Forest, 35,000.
Now, most of us can remember the very euphoric years of 1989, 1990, 91, when all this began to change. Tell us about that.
Yes, of course, in our nations, those are called singing revolutions because, as young people say, well, we must have sung all the time. Yes, it's spiritual weapons, it's nonviolent resistance through identity, culture, history, but also you need other methods. And one of the most famous demonstrations, of course, was the Baltic Way on August 23, 1989, which was the longest human chain in history, connecting capital cities, so Riga in the middle, and then Vilnius, Tallinn, almost 700 kilometers and close to 2 million people. You can find many videos and photos on YouTube about the Baltic Way. Today's kids understand if I tell them this is flash mob, yeah, for 15 minutes.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. So I think we have a slide on that. Not the photo of the people, but the text by your exhibition there. But coming back to the singing revolution, um, the Baltic nations had these huge song festivals, singing festivals, and that's what that was about, wasn't it? Um, yeah, that's the text. That's right. The Baltic
Uh,
Way. Yeah.
yes, of course, and that goes way back. I know Jeff is you are expert in uh, church history in Europe, and also how, of course, it was church influenced, where choir tradition came from. Here we can go back to the Moravians and the Brethren movement, and how when there were spiritual revivals in Latvian territory and also Estonia and this whole region, yeah, where the tradition of choirs came from through the church. But this is part of our cultural identity, which is very strong, and also dancing, like folk dance. So people do it not professionally, even though some groups are very professional, but they really are committed. And every 5 years, we have a big festival. One guest asked me today why we don't do it each year. Well, it's such a big endeavor and it takes so much time to organize, and people have to sacrifice their time. We want them to work also during the summer, but they're so popular. It's
Yeah.
a big draw for tourism as well, and you can never get tickets. It's always, they're sold out within minutes, and then
So
you're
how many
trying.
thousand are there? And they're in large outdoor auditoriums, aren't they?
Yeah, for example, in the big amphitheater for the choirs, they put them all together, and it can be up to 20,000 in one choir. And the
Singing.
dancers are singing, yeah.
And how many are listening?
I think now in the new, it's also reconstructed, and at least 40 to 50,000.
Okay, okay. So they're really big events. And
Yes,
that's also in Estonia and
in
Lithuania as
Lithuania,
well. Yes,
yes.
yes. There is actually a video called "The Singing Revolution" that tells the story, and the significance is that they were singing in their own national language, and so it was a kind of a nationalistic protest against the communist suppression, and the authorities found it very difficult to know how to respond to that. Is that correct?
Yes, and of course, we had those episodes where there would be a folk song, which everyone knew exactly what they meant, and the emotion and the history and the yearning for freedom. And then often those would be repeated again. Authorities were not happy about it, but of course, you can't make, public scene. Or one time they actually cut the live broadcast because again one of these songs which was kind of on the blacklist, that when you read between the lines, again Latvians understand what it's talking about, and then
Yeah.
when the choirs wanted to repeat that song again and again, it was like cut the broadcast, stop
So there
showing
was a
it.
subversive message coming through that everybody
Yes.
understood, but probably the authorities would have been native language Russian and not either Latvian or Estonian or whatever.
Yeah, well,
And
the local Latvian communist authorities, they
oh, they
quickly
knew what it was.
understood, but
Okay.
again,
Yes.
they tried to react, but without, making
Yes.
it too obvious.
Yes. But they had to go against the huge numbers of people. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's why this was one of the many ways in which all across the Soviet Union these protests were being made around about this time. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's really fascinating. And now, I'd like to ask you later on about some of the people that you've been taking through. But um, how long overall was Latvia under totalitarian rule, whether that was Soviet and Nazi?
So together, that's 51 year. And our republic, as I said, founded in 1918. So this year we will celebrate 107 years. Yeah, as a
Yes. Yeah.
republic, that's not very long. And when you take those 50 years out of 107, yeah, you can see that, of course, it has left very deep scars. There's lots of collective trauma. And very tragically, the war in Ukraine, of course, is opening many of these also pain, collective pain and trauma.
Yes, yes. Now, of course, just nearby in Belarus, Latvia doesn't share a border with Belarus, but Lithuania does. Is that correct?
No, Latvia does.
Oh, you do. So just
Yeah,
across the border then.
actually longer border than we share with Russia.
Aha. Okay. So if you were to go to Minsk, there's no similar museum. Of course, you still have the KGB headquarters or the FSB. I don't know what they call it there, where the kind of torture and interrogation goes on that your museum describes. I mean, it's just across the border, isn't it?
Yes, and that is very tragic because you live in this kind of reality where you know nothing about your neighbor. Because of course independent journalism is not possible. Like Latvian journalists cannot go to Belarus and come back and report what is happening there. So literally it feels like there is this black hole next to us. I have given many tours, not recently, but in the last few years, to people from Belarus. And I remember vividly this one young couple when we, in our exhibition, talk about political prisoners. And they got very emotional because for them, this is not history, but for them, this is present. And they have friends who have been imprisoned, and they even have friends who have disappeared. So most likely they are not alive anymore.
Mm, mm, mm. Well, since the Soviet invasion, sorry, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, um, how have you noticed the museum taking on a new relevance?
Well, this is something we did not expect. Well, none of us, of course, in Europe or around the world, you think these things belong in museums. This is a narrative from the past. And also, how for our young children or younger students in high schools and universities, it's like history that you study, and especially it's 20th century, it's already a last century here. But what we found out that for many people, history became relevant because it's not abstract anymore. You can take any topic. You can talk about ultimatum or these so-called referendums, which when Latvia was occupied by Soviet Union first time, they demanded to organize elections for a new parliament. Well, can you guess how many lists of candidates? Only one. And can you guess the result? They said that it was 98%, and that Latvia asked to join Soviet Union. So when we think of annexation of Crimea, of course, people go, aha, this is déjà vu. When we ask our students, are deportations happening anywhere again? And they immediately think of Ukraine and the children.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Latvia has a considerable Russian population. Do you have Russian Latvians coming through the museum? And if so, how do they respond?
We do, as I mentioned, students, yeah, because we have integrated education now, and many of them come from Russian-speaking families. And this is where in Latvia we are more careful. We talk about our Russian-speaking Latvians because it doesn't mean that they're ethnically Russian.
Hmm.
It's very complicated identity when you talk about your nationality or your parents or your grandparents' background, because maybe you have grandparents that were Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, Lithuanian. Okay, what are you? But the common language in Soviet Union was Russian. So all nations were being Russified. So that would be another conversation about identity. But for these young people, they identify themselves very differently, as even if they identify as Russian, as European Russian. They say, I have nothing to do with today's Russia, with Putin. Most of them don't even know any relatives there anymore. So they are very strongly pro-EU, pro-NATO. They speak all different languages, especially English. Latvian, Russian, other foreign languages. So getting information from different sources is not a problem for them. Where, yes, some of the older ones, and there is a big generational gap in this
Hmm.
sense, that some only speak Russian. So you
And
can
listen to
imagine.
Russian television, right?
Yes, so if they can't watch it on TV in Latvia, those channels were taken off. But
Oh,
you can find
okay.
everything on internet,
Yes,
and so you can
yes.
be in that bubble. So of course, some of these students even share that yes, in their family they hear these narratives. Some of them then have conflicts with their parents or grandparents, and again, this is not unlike other countries that are maybe polarized or divided societies over certain issues, and or even yeah, historic narratives. And but we see, like I said, big change in generations. And also, you can never talk about any monolithic group. Just like in the mid to late 80s in Soviet Union, it did not matter what language you spoke, but what were you talking about in
Yeah.
your home. Did you want changes or not changes, democracy or communism, Soviet Union or independent countries? Yeah, it's the same today.
You mentioned your grandparents being exiled. I guess virtually all Latvians have had um, ancestors or foreparents who were sent outside the country at some stage or been affected in some way. Is that correct?
Yes, so in 1941, more than 15,000 were reported, and also in 1949, more than 42,000 were deported. That's when my grandmother's family were deported. And they
But then,
returned because things changed only when Stalin died in
aha,
1953. And then under Nikita Khrushchev, there was the softening, and slowly people could return. They had to make their own way, but there was never any restitution or rehabilitation. So
aha.
actually, they were like second-class citizens.
All right, we've just had to have a brief break. The cleaners were coming in, and as the museum is empty right now. Um, but so, how long have you been actually working for the museum now?
This is my fifth year, yeah, just starting. Actually, my own background is not in history, even though I've always been interested and I considered studying history, but my degree is in theology. So, a master's degree from University of Latvia. But when I wrote my master's thesis and as well bachelor's thesis, it was very much connected to this history in Latvia because my bachelor's thesis focused on forgiveness and reconciliation in a post-totalitarian society. And in master's thesis, I was actually looking at relations, interethnic relations in the church, because that was also affected by the Soviet period, especially in the Baptist Union, because many Baptists that were fleeing from Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, where there was much harsher persecution and more restrictions, many of them had moved to Soviet Latvia because it was a little bit more free here, even though they still did things underground. Yeah, so we also had official church which had to, I would not maybe use the word collaborate, but had to, comply. And then you had the underground Baptist church. But we also have this segregation based on language, Latvian speaking Baptist churches and Russian speaking Baptist churches. And to me, it was very interesting to also research in today's Latvia. What are these relations? What are the maybe challenges, and language was one of them. So again, especially for older generation of Russian speakers who had never learned Latvian, so there were those communication problems. Yeah, so all that to say, as I studied theology, was very focused on history as well. And then I had a classmate in uni who started working at this museum, and he was offering me when there was a vacancy in the education department. And I have always wanted to teach, but maybe not in the classroom, but museum is definitely educational space.
Now, these are Schuman Talks, and we send them out on the ninth day of each month at 6 o'clock in the evening to commemorate the Schuman Declaration of May the 9th 1950 at 6 o'clock, which really was the beginning of the whole process of European integration, a process based on forgiveness and reconciliation. And so we highlight the central role that forgiveness and reconciliation played in the forming of modern Europe. Um, who have been the main agencies for forgiveness and reconciliation in the Latvian story?
I would say it's individuals. It's always individuals because for institutions, I find it much harder. I have maybe never asked it quite like you asked me, but of course, as you know, in many of these post-communist, post-socialist countries, it was often the old regime that just, as we say, switched the uniform to civilian clothing, or switch, from now I'm communist to
Hmm.
something else. So, of course, for them, what in Latvian this word lustrācija or lustration, transparency, was not something you would do voluntarily. Yeah, no society really voluntarily wants to do that. And also the church, it was difficult because there had been so much compromise under Soviet occupation with the mainstream churches, as I
Hmm. Hmm.
mentioned earlier, for Lutheran, Catholic, Russian Orthodox, and especially in Russian Orthodox Church, also many of the ex-KGB informants, yeah, had become priests or had been
Oh,
priests. So very complicated
yeah,
history, and
yeah.
again, you don't want to have that spotlight on yourself.
Hmm.
So everyone can point fingers at each other, but not wanting to do this hard work. So it's always these prophetic voices, it's individuals, and from those who had suffered, and they would have every right to be bitter or broke, like we would understand if they were uh, speaking about justice, which they are. But we have few of those special people in Latvia who are also speaking forgiveness publicly, and one of them is a very special lady, Lidija Lasmane, who just celebrated 100 years. Yeah, we had the big birthday celebrations for her in July. She can still give radio, television interviews. Arrested 3 times in the late 40s, in the 70s for reading the wrong books. And the last political arrests in Soviet Union were in 1983. Yeah, which is not that long ago when we think
Hmm.
about it. She was only released in 1987 during the reforms that Mikhail Gorbachev also started. But she is devout Christian. She is from a Baptist church, but she is very ecumenical because in her last imprisonment, uh, in the mid 80s, she calls it her university. Yeah, she
Yes.
never went to university, she never
Mm.
got higher education, but there where she was together with all these intellectuals, these ladies from different republics, then part of Soviet Union, who were writers, who were professors, who were nuns, and all together they created this fellowship, and it's just incredible story. But also later, already when Latvia was independent in the 90s, she was working in one of these archives that was dealing with KGB archives, and especially the informants' names and their cases. And she discovered who had betrayed her to KGB. And it was a very close family friend,
Oh.
Latvian, also Christian,
Mm.
yeah, church-going person. But he himself had suffered. He had been imprisoned in Gulag, yeah, those hard labor camps. So most likely he was forced to collaborate. He probably was manipulated. They probably threatened his family. So she does not judge him. He had already passed away when she found out his name. And then she always talks in interviews about this experience, which was deeply spiritual for her when she wanted to forgive. But of course, you can't have a conversation with person who is not there anymore. And then as she listened to one sermon, uh, encouraging you to have imaginary conversation. And of course, there is different spiritual practices, and there are people who do that. And she was able to forgive, and she always talks about it. But she also has been one of the voices in our society that has talked about transparency. And actually, we had a very hot debate about specifically these informants archives, whether to make them public or not. As you may know, in East Germany, Stasi, they had taken it
Yes.
to another level. You write down
Yes.
everything on about your neighbors, and they made all that public very quickly,
Yes.
where many countries have not made them public. And each country is, like I said, going about it differently. But here, finally, Parliament voted in 2018. Since then, they have been made public. We have a website. Anyone can go on that website. And she was a strong advocate that we have to open these things. We have to talk about it. We
Hmm.
have to go through this mud, if we can put it that way. Yeah, now
Yeah. Yeah.
to get to the next.
To drain the swamp. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. But she, despite her prison experiences, she lived to be 100, and she's still alive.
Yes, and cognitively amazing. Yeah, she's frail in
Yeah.
her body, but in
Wow.
her mind and in her spirit, she's still
Yeah.
a giant.
Yeah. Wow. Well, tell us about some of the special guests you've had coming. We started to talk about that before we had to move. You've had
Uh,
presidents and premiers and cabinet ministers and so on coming to visit. So, what's been some of their responses?
yes, and of course, when I meet other visitors, I always want them to feel as special as any diplomat or president. Actually, today I had a very special group. We there were high-level meetings in Latvia for Lutheran Church, the World Lutheran Federation. So there were many bishops and also lay people. So today there was a big group from Czech Republic and Romania, Germany, France, Ukraine, um, and Latvia, and there may have been a couple others, Finland. And of course, when I ask people where they're from, very often I say, your country will be mentioned in our history because, again, we're so interconnected.
Yes.
So, with this group, knowing, of course, that their sphere of influence today is church and church's role in society. So, as we went through the exhibition, of course, there is the normal facts, the basic facts, but I very much focused on the resistance that the church was inspiring. And, of course, many religious leaders suffered because of that. And also, we have lots of artifacts. For example, in those Gulag camps that people had made, we have quite a few crosses in our exhibition, and they're made from different materials. There's one little cross, white cross made from reindeer bone. We don't
Oh.
have reindeer in Latvia, so it's
Hmm.
one of those far regions in the far north. Or there was a small icon, a drawing, which was given to this Latvian lady by some nuns from Ukraine, in fact. Uh, and So, again, all of these stories, and of course, we talk about also restricted church. We have one artifact in our exhibition which was used, it's kind of a uh, self-made, not copy machine, but with light copier, where again they could distribute song sheets for churches because that was illegal
Yeah.
literature. So
Clandestine. Mm.
that was very special group today. I will say my highlight of this week probably. uh, some of them are more challenging, like, okay, again, in the context of war in Ukraine, of course, we all know that some countries with their current leadership, yeah, they're not very keen to continue supporting Ukraine. Maybe I don't want to mention them by name, but if I have a group like that, okay, one I can mention, for example, from Africa. Yeah, we've had delegations from some countries like Zimbabwe. For example, I looked up that this delegation they have good relationship with Moscow, with Kremlin, and of course, in Zimbabwe there are many challenges with human rights abuses and you name it, But so again, then I try to think of those links that we can build bridges. For example, colonialism, because also in the post modern studies look at a lot of history in our part of Europe also as colonialism, because the Soviet Union used many of the same methods as any empire. And again, so when I kept bringing up this notion, I could see, this recognition. We understand when you talk about colonialism. And
Hmm.
actually, of course, I can't always read people's minds, but different ones from North Africa, for example, countries that also had fought their independence war against different colonial powers. Of course, there's always some deeper connection on human level, especially like if I meet some ambassadors whose families have also suffered. Yeah, like there was Algerian ambassador, or actually many government officials from United States, and one of them, one of actually representatives from Republican Party whose parents originally came to United States from Poland and Hungary, and his father had actually also been deported to I don't know what part of Soviet Union, and spent 1.5 year in one of those hard labor camps, and had never talked much about it. Obviously, he was so traumatized. And as this American visitor started to share his dad's story, he started to cry. And then we just have to pause our guided tour, because this is very personal story
Mm.
for him as he looks
Mm.
at the testimonies in our exhibition. So I
Mm.
would say, to me, the human connection, and that's why, as I mentioned in the beginning in the exhibition, the mirrors. Of course, for us Latvians, the mirrors mean that we are connected to the story of Latvia. These are our ancestors. And the metaphor, of course, is always that the past affects the present and present affects the future. So it connects past, present, future. But the mirror for any other person is just one human being to another human being. And the choices, you know, you're forced to make in those circumstances. And then later, the choice, as we said, how to live the rest of your life when you have walked through this darkness.
That's really fascinating. Now, just to wrap up, what would you say are the most important lessons that people can take away from the museum, given the current situation today and the gathering war clouds?
Uh, One of the lessons, of course, people see the obvious. When they visit Riga, they see Ukrainian flags everywhere. And when they visit our museum, even more so, they understand why the solidarity with Ukraine is on such a deep level, almost subconscious. Yeah, in Latvian and, of course, also Estonian, Lithuanian, and many other societies. But those who neighbor Russia, and fortunately not friendly neighbor to us, at the moment, with lots of threats and rhetoric and language. But then when we talk about supporting Ukraine, also it is what is Ukraine fighting about. And we can
Mm.
be very grateful that we restored our independence without this kind of bloodshed,
Yes.
even though there were lives lost also in Latvia and Lithuania. So I think one lesson that people always think about is the price for freedom. And of course, freedom or liberty is this very abstract notion, in a way, in a sense. Yeah, now when you ask people what is liberty, okay, for individuals we can say, yeah, that is my right, yeah, to have my will, and also to apply my will. Yeah, so this is my individual liberty, my individual freedom. But what is liberty for a nation and for a country? And one time I was asked by a German journalist, she said, why is freedom so important to Latvians? And I smiled, kind of. I thought, well, I thought to myself, freedom is important to everyone, I think, to all nations. But what came out of my mouth, I said, you only understand what freedom is when you lose it.
She came from West Germany, no doubt.
Uh, I assume, yeah. She was with Deutsche Welle, yeah, so it's, of course, a well known German media. And so, yeah, so this understanding that when you lose your freedoms,
Yeah.
then you understand what is this air that we breathe. Like today in democratic countries, again, with all of our challenges and problems, it's the air we breathe. Like I tell our students, you wake up in the morning, you don't have to think about it. And I think also for us Latvians, it helps us to understand our ancestors, especially our grandparents' generation, because they were so patriotic. Of course, the Soviet regime blamed them for extreme nationalism, said that, oh, they're so nationalistic. But that was generation. My grandmother was born in 1923 when Latvia was already independent republic, where her parents were born in empire, yeah, Russian Empire. So her generation, they knew they all they knew was freedom. They grew up in freedom. And when Latvia was occupied and they lost it,
Mm.
of course they were so ready to resist, and young people are
Yeah.
being more idealistic. So yeah, maybe this is one of the main lessons or the reflections that people think about. And when I look in our guest book, I probably the word that comes up most is free. And of
Yeah.
course, like
Yeah.
free, and they say free Belarus, free
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Ukraine. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
you can name other places around the world because our guests come from everywhere. And
Yeah.
again, as they walk through our history, they think about what's happening in the world today, and whatever comes to my mind, to their mind, they also write about that. But again, the most frequent word is freedom.
So yeah, the lesson is we cannot take freedom for granted. And
And second word is peace. But
aha.
also, people understand, just like we Christians talk about grace and that we don't want cheap grace. Yeah, we can mention Dietrich Bonhoeffer. They also understand that peace is also not an empty,
Hmm.
kind of just the cloud, the white cloud that you can say peace, peace when there is no peace. But that peace includes those elements, yeah, from Psalms, where truth and mercy and justice and peace meet. Yeah,
Yeah.
that you need all those elements. You need truth. Of course, that's what Schuman Center is also about. You also need mercy, and we talked about forgiveness, and you also need justice. That's why restitution, transparency, those are very important elements to achieve peace. So peace is also not abstract or empty word. So yeah, freedom and peace.
Ineta, this has been a most fascinating talk, and thank you very much for what you're doing, as well as taking the time to tell us about it tonight. Thank you very much
Well,
indeed.
and thank you, Jeff, for all the work you do, and I'm very privileged and happy to be part of it.
Thank you. Well, next month we'll have as our guest uh, on the Schuman Talk, Doug Johnston, who is the co editor of this significant book that came out 30 years ago, Religion, the Missing Dimension of Statecraft. And he founded the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy. And we connected recently in relation to Ukraine. And I think he will give us some very interesting insight on why religion plays a very important role in the whole area of international diplomacy. So we look forward to joining you again next month on November the 9th at 6 p.m. Thank you.